These are the 1984 to 87 GMC RTSs, the RTS 04s and 06s for the private bus lines. Now they were ordered by the NYCDOT for both local and express bus services. They've embraced these RTS 04s as they did earlier with the 1979 GMC RTS 03s for the Queens private bus lines, and in 1984 to 87, the NYCDOT made a purchase of 448 RTSs for 6 private bus lines. So, without further ado, we're gonna hit the list of private bus lines that received these RTSs. So let's begin. So 351 to 394, along with 395 to 420, were delivered to Command Bus Company and were painted in yellow and green, while 24 to 42, along with 43 to 54, were delivered to Steinway Transit and were painted in orange and white. 205 to 243, along with 244 to 258, as well as 270 to 274, were delivered to Queens Transit and were also painted in orange and white. Steinway and Queens Transit later merged into Queens Surface Corporation in 1988, making them have a total of 88 RTSs. Wow, that's a big number. 221 to 292, along with 601 to 622, were delivered to Green Lines and were painted in, obviously, green. 501 to 529, along with 551 to 567, were delivered to Jamaica Buses and were painted in brown and white. Then they were later given the red, tan, and brown scheme. While last but not least, 640 to 715, along with 716 to 740, as well as 761 to 763, were delivered to Triborough Coach and were painted in red and white, while some were later given the red and gray lightning bolt. Triborough Coach also received 6 methanol-powered RTSs numbered as M1 to M6. Now these units were tested to see which type of alternative fuel was suitable for New York City Transit buses. However, this was a short-lived experiment as they were later converted to diesel. Command RTSs 362, 366, 367, 378, 381, 383 to 394, as well as 405 to 419, were later given to Green Lines and were renumbered as 636 to 659, while 395 to 416, as well as 375 to 377, were given to Jamaica Bus and were renumbered as 571 to 583. Triborough coach methanol-powered RTSs M1 to M6 were later converted to diesel, while M3 was given to Jamaica Bus and was renumbered as 3701, while M5 to M6 were given to Green Lines and were renumbered as 653 to 654, while M1, M2, and M4 were subsequently retired. So these RTSs were pretty much the same as the previous delivery of RTSs from 1979. However, similar to the New York City Transit RTSs, these carried push-type exit doors, but they also carry a few differences, one of them being the year model. 6 units were 1984 models, 272 units being 1985 models, 163 units being 1986 models, and 7 units being 1987 models. Other major differences these RTSs carry are roll signs as opposed to flip dots, the lack of hoodlum lights, the overall interior configuration, all of the windows being openable, as well as the amber rectangular reflectors on top of the headlights. The third major difference about these RTSs would be the generation and design. 176 RTSs are T8J-204 models, 102 being T8J-604 models, 73 being T8J-206 models, and 97 being T8J-606 models. Now the T8J-204 and 206 models were a bit of a rarity for New York City, as they were only 96 inches wide, while New York City Transit, as well as the rest of the private bus lines, only ran the standard 102-inch wide RTSs. The Command RTSs were known to be very special because they were the first out of all of the 7 private bus lines to ever be delivered with flip dots. However, this was just a short experiment, as the flip dots were later replaced by regular roll signs in the late 80s to early 90s. Green Line's 221 was also known to be a very special unit because it was known to be the 10,001st RTS to be ever built and was renumbered as 10,001 to honor its historical significance. Now moving on to the powertrain. So these RTSs signify the use of the Detroit Diesel Series 6 V92 engine with the Allison V730 transmission. Together, they sound like this. So, what do I think about these RTSs? Well, they're okay. They're pretty much a decent fleet, but nowhere as decent as the RTSs from New York City Transit, with the exception of a few nitpicks from both drivers, passengers, mechanics, and transit fans, but hey, what do you expect? When MTA took over the 7 private bus lines, 80% of these RTSs have been retained and renumbered, and by 2006, roughly 290 RTSs remained in service. So, here's a list of RTSs that got renumbered. So 318 to 328 were ex-command units, while 1110 to 1139, along with 1151 to 1136, along with 1191, as well as 1200 were ex-Jamaica units. 4221 to 4265, along with 4269, along with 4277, along with 4284 to 4296, as well as 4298 to 4299, as well as 5835 to 5879, as well as 8582 were ex-Green Line units. Well, last but not least, 7050 to 7121 were ex-Triborough coach units. Unfortunately, the Queen's Surface RTSs were the first ones to retire early, and therefore they did not survive the takeover. Many were scrapped, while some were sold to Lafayette and Greenville Bus in Jersey City. Ex-Jamaica Unit 1162 was the only unit to ever be repainted into the blue and white paint scheme. Unfortunately, this unit did not materialize, and therefore it was scrapped. By late 2006, these RTSs were slowly starting to leave the property, and by mid-2007, they were all gone, with none of them left on the road. It's unfortunate that these RTSs have been retired, but luckily, Green Line's 221 has been preserved for the museum fleet as its historical fleet number 10,001. So, as for these 1984 to 87 RTSs, these buses are gone, but will most certainly never be forgotten. So with that being said, this is Sonic57053, wishing you guys to stay safe, stay healthy, and wishing you guys a happy holidays, and thanking you guys for watching.